Welcome back for another episode of Set at Liberty podcast. I'm Brandi Roney and I am your host. I am thrilled that you decided to join me once again. Thank you so much for trusting me to bring you God's word each week. Thank you for trusting me to listen and believe that He has a message for you. As I was praying this week, searching, kind of asking the Lord, what do you want me to take to the listeners this week? What do you want? What is your message to them? I really felt like He just wanted me to share my story with you. I've shared bits and pieces throughout the past few episodes. And last week we talked kind of about, actually, we really dug into the big picture, the overall picture of what Scripture tells us is the heart of God. And so this week, I really felt like He wanted me to just let you into my story. What is it that He's brought me through? How have I learned to hear His voice? Why do I believe what I believe? And how in the world that can help you? And so I want to preface everything that I'm going to say by the fact that I know this story is what the Lord has given me. It's what He's brought me through. It's not what He did to me in any way, but I have learned every step to trust Him and to see His provision, His love, and His design in all of it. I will share there are some trigger warnings for those who have walked through trauma. There are some things that I'm going to share about my story that might be a little difficult to hear, but I hope that you hear my heart, and I hope that you hear and see through the junk and what God has done in spite of everything. So I pick up with my story, of course, where we should at the beginning. I will preface and I will say that when it comes to parents, I absolutely hit the jackpot. The Lord blessed me with the most amazing parents that I really could have asked for. My parents, just like any other set of parents, they weren't perfect. They made mistakes. They did things. They didn't understand all the things. They did what they needed to do, but their heart is genuine. And if there's anything that I took away from my parents, it was that there is a God, He loves me, and they knew that they needed to raise their family in church. So I'm the oldest of three kids. I have a younger brother and a younger sister. And so, of course, in true oldest daughter fashion, there were things that I walked through, things that I learned, expectations my parents had of me that kind of faded away with some of the other two. But I love my brother and sister with everything that I have. I love my parents with everything that I have. And as I tell my story, you're going to see that. You're going to see that I completely trust them, and I'm so thankful for them and all that they've stood by me and all that they've helped me walk through. So my parents knew very on that it was super important to raise us in church. And so I have been in church. I've been raised in a Christian home my entire life, from the time I was conceived all the way through. My parents believed that it was imperative that we hear the word of God. And so that's where we grew up. I was baptized into the church at 24 days old. Sunday school every Sunday, vacation Bible school, all the songs, all the Bible stories, all the children's sermons, all the things. When I got old enough, I absolutely signed up to serve in altar service. I learned to light the candles. I learned to carry the cross. I did all the things that you are supposed to do in Christendom. I was enrolled in catechism class when it came time, 6th grade. So I have been, if it wasn't that I was at the church that our family went to because my parents maybe had to work, we went to church with the neighbor at the Community First Church, where we were still in Sunday school, still sat and listened to the word. We were surrounded by people that taught us, admonished us, and showed us the way of God. Why do I tell you those pieces? I tell you those pieces because even though I grew up there still were a lot of questions. Even though I was surrounded and I was taught the word of God from the earliest of my memories, there were still things that happened in my life that hurt, that caused immense trauma, that caused questions. And so my story is that I've had to wrestle through those questions, even though I grew up in church, even though I was taught all of the things. And so I want you to hear my heart that it is 1000% okay to question. It is okay to go to God and say, God, I don't know what I believe about this. I don't know what I believe about you. I don't know that I trust this. He can handle that. And that's what I've had to do. So growing up in church all my life, um, my parents, working class, I would spend, as a young child, I would spend time with my cousins, my aunts. They would watch us, my godparents. They would watch me when my parents had to work. And this, of course, provided opportunity. And what I'm going to say, this is kind of the trigger part of in my story. And I want to preface this by the fact that I share this story not out of vindication at all. I have fully forgiven. I have fully walked free from this at this point in time, but I know these pieces of my story will help someone in some way. I've already seen it happen. So somewhere between the best timeline I can come up with, somewhere 3-4 years old, somewhere in that category, that age group, that at that time, I was molested by a family member at a very young age. They were a bit older than I was, and it wasn't a crime of malice. It was a crime of opportunity. It was a crime of exploration, but yet it caused some very severe wounds. It caused a lot of rejection to be experienced after everything came out. It actually came out sometime when I was probably 7 or 8. So I don't know how many times this happened. I don't know over what course of time this happened. The best timeline I can come up with is 3 or 4, maybe up to 6 or 7-ish, is the best timeline I can explain. But in that, I still have the memories. I remember the things happening. It plays like a video in my head. I remember the environment. I remember the things that happened. I remember the things that were said. And those are the places that the Lord is healing. So out of this, when it came out that this had happened, my parents did what what any parent would wind up doing, and they became super protective of me, and my younger siblings at this point in time. And so out of my parents' capacity and out of my parents' desire to protect us, it meant that we became very, very guarded. We were not allowed to go and play with cousins anymore. We were not allowed out of my parents' eyesight. We were not allowed to go and spend the night off with peers. It meant that we kind of had to sit with mom and dad and just rest in that protection. But what that communicated was that somehow I was bad. I was being punished. I did something wrong. I knew the why, but apparently that meant that I had done wrong and I now had to sit out while everyone else played. And it really became kind of an unspoken sore spot amongst the family, as things were not really that no one wanted to talk about, no one wanted to address it. And so I was just kind of left off to myself, out of protection. I know that's why my parents did it, and in no way am I mad at them, because they did what they knew to do. But however, this coded in my brain that I was bad, I was in trouble, something was wrong with me. Out of this grew this very disgruntled, almost disdain, like hatred towards myself, very negative self-talk. I very much believed that I was bad. I very much believed that I wasn't as good as the others. I took on this immense desire, this immense, almost like a responsibility that I had to be perfect from that point forward in order to gain the favor of those that I loved, those that I wanted to be accepted by. This turned into, of course, shame is what I took on, that not just that you did bad, but that you are bad. And that's a lie of the enemy. And that's something that I want to really expose what he did in my life. Because this became this unyielding fear that something would happen to me again. From that point in time, I can remember as a young child, even well into my teenage years, being absolutely terrified, like tortured, terrified, that if it ever rained at night, I would lie awake, just convinced that I would hear things outside my window. I was convinced that someone was going to break in, they were going to hurt me again. This is something that the enemy really played tricks with my brain. And this multiple times, I can't count how many times I would go and I wake my dad up in the middle of the night. Daddy, there's someone outside my window. Daddy, I hear something. Please protect me. And of course, in true daddy fashion, he would get up and he would go and he'd check. He would, search the perimeter of the house. He would let me know that there was no one there, that I was safe, and send me back to bed. But I was convinced in my own head that I was not safe, even though my sister was staying in the same, we shared a bedroom until I was 15. I was convinced that I would be harmed again. I was convinced that bad things happened when it rained, especially at night. And so this was this unconscionable fear that I had from that point that I carried with me. This turned into, like I said, a disdain, just an utter hatred of who I was, because I must not be good enough. I must not be worthy. There's something wrong with me. I despised who I was. I despised the fact that I was female. I despised the fact that I was a girl, because girls were weak, and that meant that they would be hurt. And so I can remember from the time I was probably third grade. Like I said, this really came out to my family when I was about second grade. About third grade, I can remember conscionably hating being a girl. I hated wearing dresses. I hated pink. I hated flowers, butterfly, anything that was girly. I absolutely despised, and I really took on a persona of a tomboy, just as trying to be as hard and as tough as I could be, because that meant that maybe I wouldn't be hurt again. And so I carried this with me for years and years and years, well into middle school. This absolute hatred. I can remember, in the South, you twice a year you get a new dress. Twice a year you dress up, kind of to the nines. All of the things it's Easter Sunday and Christmas Eve. Those two church services, you are going to look your best, and your mama's going to pick out a new dress and new shoes, and that's what we were going to do. And truth be told, I can remember every single year just this ultimate battle my mom and I would have over me wearing a dress. I hated dresses. I hated being girly. And so I wanted to just run as far and fast away from feminism as I could. I hated being female because females were weak. At least that's what I believed in my head. So I continued in this kind of spiral. Now, keep in mind, I'm still going to church. I'm still attending. I'm still attending Sunday school. I'm still learning all these things. I'm working in altar service just about every Sunday. I'm doing something in service to the Lord. I'm still attending church, because that was not an option in our household. No, I never had an actual substance abuse problem, but I sure had a drug problem, because my mama drugged me to church. Kicking and screaming sometimes. But that's where we were going to be. If it was Sunday, if it was Wednesday, if the doors of the church were open, or if their doors to the church in the community were open, that was where we were going to be. And so all this was going on. And I can remember just this, for lack of a better word, just this depression, this heaviness, this real I don't like me. I don't like life. I don't remember lots of happiness during those years. Probably at least third grade, I know, all the way up to at least seventh grade. I can remember just this growing heaviness in life, this growing disdain for life. I met a new friend, I remember, probably fourth, fifth grade, and we became, kind of that thick as thieves, and got in trouble together. It became this, well, if I can't get attention, or if I can't be accepted because I don't make the grades, I don't get the awards, then I'm going to act out. And so I kind of entered that rebellion. I'm not going to do what you told me to do. I'm going to do the thing you told me not to do. My mouth typically got me in a lot of trouble there. which it's always very interesting how the enemy chooses to twist our gifts. So young childhood was not super duper enjoyable. Um, I'm sure there were great things that I did with my siblings. I'm sure there were great memories that I had, vacations, things like that. But that's not what stands out. It stands out that I walked through life knowing there had to be something more, but really hating the life that I was living. And I can actually remember getting to this place, not really accepted by peers. I was never one of the popular kids, never one of the people that were accepted. I can remember a new girl coming to school, seventh grade, and we had the same name. She also was named Brandi. And I think we even spelled it the same. I do spell my name with an I, not a Y or an IE. And so I remember, hey, this is a namesake. Like maybe we could be great friends. Um, and I remember kind of befriending her, just out of being trying to be kind. And I remember, invited her to my birthday party, sleepover. We became decent friends with some of my other peers that I had somewhat decent friendships with. And I remember this one day at school. Apparently in middle school, it's like the thing to do to make sure you wave at everyone as you walk down the hall changing classes. And so as I was walking down the hall to go to my next class this one day, everybody waved at me. Everybody, hey, Brandi, hey, Brandi. And they kind of, seemed like they wanted to be my friend. And I kind of had this thought of, wow, like maybe people like me for a change. Um, and that began, kind of after the beginning part of the day. But by lunchtime, people figured out that it wasn't me that had the new boyfriend that was really liked and really popular. It was the other Brandi. And I remember the feelings of rejection. I remember the really being cast aside, being actually told, oh no, it's the other Brandi that we like, not you. I remember the heaviness of that. And I remember vividly this one sermon that was preached in church. One Sunday, talking about Jesus in the temple, when Jesus went and cleared the temple of all of the money changers, and right before his death, and he cast them all out and says, "No, my Father's house is to be a house of prayer." And I remember listening to this sermon this day, and I don't remember what it was that the pastor said, but I remember walking away thinking, all my life I've been told that this Jesus was sinless. All my life I've been told that he's the perfect one and he's the only hope that I have. But now this pastor just told me that Jesus sinned. He lost his temper. I don't understand. And so I remember walking away with such a hopelessness for the next few weeks that, well, if Jesus was a sinner too, like me, and I've been taught all this, well, maybe that's not the same. And I guess I don't have any hope after all. And so I remember I kind of had this one thing that I did at one, like every after lunch each day. I was typically the last one in line. And it was my job to go and let the next class know that it was time to come to lunch. And I would always pass this one teacher in the hallway, and she would ask me how my day was going. And my typical reply was, "I'm here." And that's about all I ever replied, because that's essentially how I felt in life, is I was just here. I didn't have a reason. I didn't have a purpose. There certainly wasn't anything to be happy about or joyful, because I hated myself. I hated who I was. I hated what I looked like. I hated the fact that I was female. I hated the fact that I was kind of used goods. I was thrown away. I was cast away. I was rejected in just about anything that I had tried to do. But keep in mind, all this time, I was an honor student. I made decent grades. Yeah, I did get in trouble here and there, actually quite a lot of trouble on the bus. I really butted heads with the bus driver, and was quite disrespectful, to tell you the truth. And so all of this culminated in that I still went to church. I still went to youth group. I learned about this Jesus of the Bible, this God of the Bible, and supposedly he loved me. Supposedly he had a good plan for me, and I was supposed to seek a relationship with him. But I don't know how to do this. This doesn't make any sense to me. I grew up in church hearing the things, and I knew the things to do, but it wasn't real in my life. I had not experienced anything that was tangible. And so I was empty. And that's really kind of how I felt. It's just empty. And so I remember 98, March of 98, there was this youth kind of like concert that was going to be happening, and we had found out about it. We'd gone to the bookstore, and the guy there told us about this youth thing, this youth like revival thing that was going to be happening Saturday night. And my mom was always the one that whenever there was something to do, you get a friend and you get a friend and we'll all go together. And my mom was always the carpool. My mom was always the one orchestrating. We always had friends with us, at least one or two amongst the three of us. And so my mom took us this night to this thing. But the struggle there was that my mom was in a really bad car accident when I was about 10. And truth be told, my best friend at the time and I had just, and my brother, my little brother, had just been dropped off at school not 10 minutes before. We were sitting in the very back seat of our van. My brother was in the middle. My sister was up front in the minivan. You know, that's how it goes. And this car, my mom was turning to take my sister to school. She'd already dropped my brother and I and my friend off for choir practice. And so this car hit her from behind at 35 miles an hour, broke the back seat where we had just gotten out of the vehicle, compacted the van like an accordion. And my mom was hurt. My mom was almost paralyzed in that wreck from the force that she was hit with. And from that wreck, she wound up having to have 5 surgeries. I watched my mom wake up and go to bed with immense headaches for months and months on end. I watched my mom, when they did the surgery to fuse her neck together to fix the herniated disc, they severed a main nerve to her leg. And so I watched her battle that. I watched her battle terrible health struggles from all of the medications and the other surgeries that she had to go on. And so I became rather protective of my mom. I kind of took on that role as the oldest. It was my responsibility to make sure that my mom was okay through whatever happened. And so my mom took us, but her thing was she always would do for us. My mom was such a servant. She still is. I love my mom so much. She would take us to wherever it meant that we could potentially learn about God, have an encounter with God, learn something, experience something. My mom always, always, always did and served us. And so this night she took us to this youth revival thing that was happening in town. And my friend and I actually wound up sitting there, and in the beginning we were just making fun of everyone. We had never experienced any sort of worship service like this where people were dancing and praising the Lord, giving testimonies, really just worshiping God with everything they had. We had never experienced this, and so we were just cracking jokes and making fun of these people who were pouring their heart out from God. And I'm so embarrassed to say that we did that. Well, we continued to kind of just be. That's really all we did, is we just sat there and listened. We didn't really take part. We ultimately went in search of a restroom, went to the restroom, and she wound up going another direction. She found a guy to hang out with. So she went and hung out with the guy, and I went back downstairs to find my mom standing talking to some people. And I don't know these people, which means that I'm suspect of these people. And so I'd never seen anything like laying hands on people, praying for people. I'd never experienced anything like this in my life. And so I hear my mom tell them, these people that are standing around her, that she wasn't feeling well. She had a headache, but I heard her say, I don't want to leave because my kids need to hear this. And I remember these people, there were probably 5 or 6 of them. These people, they laid hands on my mom. They started touching my mom. And I was like, wait, what are you doing to my mom? And so I just stood there kind of in that protectiveness. I'm going to make sure you don't hurt my mom. And as they prayed for her, I saw my mom fall on the floor. Never have seen anything like this before in my life. I'm freaking out. What did you just do to my mom? What is happening? And so I began crying out of nowhere, began crying. And so all these people that were praying over my mom, they come over and they began praying over me. And I am freaking out, y'all. And so I remember thinking in my head, you know what? My mom fell down and they left her alone. And so maybe if I fall down, they will leave me alone too, because I don't know what is going on here. And so I remember deciding in my head, you're going to laugh at this. I remember deciding in my head, okay, I'm going to count to 3 and that is it. I'm falling and they will leave me alone. And so I start counting in my head, 1, 2, and that is it. I fall down. I'm laying on the floor. I don't know what has just happened to me as my legs just crumbled underneath me. And as I laid there on the floor in this place that I have no clue who these people are around me, my best friends abandoned me. My mom's laying in the floor. I don't know where my brother and sister are. And I just remember this feeling. The only way I know how to describe it is liquid love just pouring over me. Such a warmth, such a peace, but yet an excitement and invigoration. And I remember hearing this voice inside of me say, I love you and I want you to be my daughter. I'll never forget the sound of that voice. I remember laying there and going, oh my goodness. I remember being almost in this state of being stunned as this just liquid love radiated through my body. As I remember that feeling, I'm sorry, it's kind of heavy. As I remember experiencing this, I got up, kind of looked around. My mom was there. She checked on me, and I just went and sat down for the rest of kind of the service that was there for the night. I did not know what to say. I didn't know what to think. All I knew is that I had just had this experience that was tangible, and that moment changed the rest of my life. I knew that I had interacted with the creator of the universe. I knew that for a change, he saw me. I knew that he loved me. He told me so. And I knew that he accepted me. All my warts, all my scars, in spite of everything that had happened in my life before, in spite of everything that I knew, in spite of everything that I had learned, in spite of everything that I had not learned, he told me he loved me. And I took him at his word. And so that night, I'm sorry, trying to pull myself together. That night I went home, and we only had one bathroom in our house growing up. So you just kind of had to rotate through as you got ready for bed that night. And so I did. Grabbed my PJs and headed to the bathroom, using the restroom, changing clothes, brushing my teeth, all the things. I remember just being so overwhelmed with joy and love and just acceptance and this feeling of wholeness that I'd never known before. And so I remember praying that night, knowing for the first time that I had experienced this real, intimate experience with God. And so I prayed that night, and I told God that I didn't ever want to do life without him again. I had done it my way for so many years that I wanted everything that he had for me, and I trusted him, and I wanted him to take over. I wanted to live my life for him from that point forward. And so that day, that night, actually, March 7th of 1998, was the day that I accepted. That was the night that I accepted Jesus, not just as who I read about, not just as this person that I had been told about, but I accepted him into my life to be my Lord, to be my Savior, to walk after him. And that started a journey that I've been on for the last almost 30 years now, that I wouldn't change it for anything. And that's where I've learned that we serve a good God. We serve a God that loves us immensely. He wants to change us. He wants to bring good things into our life, and he wants to heal us of the hurt and the destruction and the twisted things that the enemy has done in our life. And so at this point in time, like I said, I had been in church all my life, but I had never experienced anything of this nature. This changed everything. Well, that night, it'd been raining kind of leading up to that, but that night, my town was actually closed. I was from Albany, Georgia. I grew up there. And that night, the city was actually closed because a flood hit. The roads began flooding. That night after we got home, we weren't really able to navigate out after that. And so my parents, both my mom worked at the hospital, my dad was a law enforcement officer. And so at that point in time, my parents kind of wound up in this like on-call situation around the clock. But they didn't close the bridges this time, so we didn't have to move into town or go stay with other family. We stayed at the house, but school was canceled. And school was canceled for almost a week. And so what this provided is it provided this opportunity for me to do what I had kind of learned, like by being in church and being in youth group. I learned that I knew that I was supposed to have this devotion kind of thing every day, and I was supposed to pray, and I was supposed to read my Bible. Like, so I began doing that. And so for this week that I sat at home without peers, without friends hanging out, without going to school, without distractions, I wound up almost in this little cocoon for at least a week before I really was around anyone else. And in that week, the Lord began to do such a work in my life, I really began to dig into his love. I began to learn more about his word. I began to read more about him, not from the point of just something I knew or a story, but I actually began to learn about him and his heart and his desire. And so that began my journey. I wanted to know everything that I could know about him. I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to experience everything that he had in my life, everything that he had for my life. I didn't want to do it on my own anymore. And so I dug in. That's one thing I can say. I have that personality that I am all in on whatever it is that I'm going to do. We're going to do it full force. And so I jumped in and I was determined that I was going to be a light for him. And so I began just trying to love people. I began to just be kind. I was no longer getting in trouble on the bus. I was no longer the troublemaker and the one stirring the pot and being rebellious and being ugly towards the bus driver. There actually was a situation pretty soon, actually, just a few months later that year, where a friend of mine had made some people mad on the bus, and someone was actually going to cut her hair. She had beautiful blonde hair, and this girl she had scissors out and she was gonna cut her hair because she was mad at her. And I stopped her and yelled to the bus driver and made sure that she was safe and all the things. And that meant that these two had to be separated on the bus from that point forward. And I remember I just sat up front so that she would have a friend to sit with. We went to church together, so why not? And so I remember sitting there, and I remember one morning I was just kind of reading my magazine. I would typically, take some headphones and just listen to worship music, or I was learning new Christian music. I was beginning to explore. I just wanted to read more. I wanted to learn more, and so I began to dig in. I'd bring a book and read on the bus instead of rebel rouse and hang out and be loud and boisterous like the others. And I remember my bus driver, bless her name was Miss Willis. And I remember one morning she says, "What happened to you?" "What do you mean?" She said, "Something's different about you. You're not the same. Like what happened?" And I told her that I met Jesus. I told her that I had gotten saved. I told her that I accepted Jesus as my savior. And I remember looking at her face in the mirror of the bus, and she kind of got choked up, and she said that she was so excited to hear that. And she told me that she had been praying for me from the time she had met me. Now, rewind, she met me and started driving my bus when I was in second grade. This was seventh grade. So for 5 years, this woman had been praying for me that I would meet the Lord. Even though I was so mean and so ugly to her, she continued to pray for me. And that humbled me so much. And I was determined, I want to be kind. I want to show this light to others. And so that's where my journey began. And so that's where I want to end today with my story. Next week, I want to continue the rest of the story and what he's done in my life since then. I pray that this ministers to you. I pray that you will hear the Lord's heart for you in my story, and come back again next week to hear part 2 of what he's done in my life since the age of 13, what he's done in my life since I surrendered everything to him. I love you guys. I pray great things for you. I pray that you have a wonderful week and that you'll join me back next week for part 2. Bye.